Your timeline stopped negotiating with other people's reality before you had language for it. Not in a moment you could point to. Not through a decision you remember making. It happened quietly. The way a sound disappears when you stop listening for it. You notice it now only because something familiar is missing. That subtle internal movement that used to activate when someone reacted strongly. That reflex to adjust yourself internally so the moment could land more smoothly. It doesn't engage the way it once did. Someone misunderstands you, and nothing inside you rushes to correct the space between you. A disagreement appears, and it stays where it is, without pulling you halfway into it. You are no longer standing between two realities, trying to stabilize both at once. There is no resistance in this. No withdrawal. No tension. Just an absence of negotiation that feels strangely neutral. Your inner state is no longer provisional. It is not waiting to see how things are interpreted elsewhere before settling. It settles as it is. And this change doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself slowly, through what you no longer feel compelled to manage. Something has already shifted. The mind just hasn't caught up yet. There was a time when alignment felt necessary for coherence. Not because you lacked clarity, but because your system was calibrated to remain flexible in response to others. Other people's moods, expectations, and interpretations carried weight inside you. Often, without you noticing. You adjusted internally, even when nothing was said out loud. You tracked reactions. You sensed tone shifts. You recalibrated your own experience so the interaction could stay balanced. That internal labor didn't feel dramatic. It felt responsible. It felt like participation. But over time, something in you recognized that constant negotiation wasn't creating stability. It was creating diffusion. You were never fully inside your own experience. Part of your attention was always elsewhere, managing how realities overlapped. Now that overlap no longer happens automatically. You still hear other perspectives. You still register emotional climates. But they don't cross the threshold into your internal system as something that needs to be resolved. They remain external. If this recognition feels familiar while you're listening, you already understand why you're here. And if you want to stay with this unfolding, you can let the video continue playing. Nothing else needs to be decided yet. The difference becomes clearer in how situations complete themselves inside you now. Before, interactions lingered. Conversations followed you after they ended, replaying in the background as if something was still pending. That lingering was a negotiation continuing internally. Your timeline stayed open, waiting for alignment to be restored. Now moments end when they end. There is less replay, less internal clarification, less need to revisit what was said or how it was interpreted. Not because you stopped caring, but because your system no longer treats misalignment as unfinished business. You can allow someone else's version of reality to exist without incorporating it, without correcting it, without carrying it forward. This doesn't feel like detachment. It feels like containment. Your nervous system no longer stays slightly activated after a difference appears. There is no internal bracing, no background preparation for future explanations. The negotiation lost relevance. And without relevance, it has nothing to sustain it. You are not opposing other people's reality. You are no longer co-managing it. What changes next is subtle, but it reaches deep. Responsibility recalibrates. Before, if someone reacted strongly or misunderstood you, part of you took that on. Not consciously, not as blame, but as something to manage. Their interpretation became a variable inside your system. Their emotional response became something you needed to account for. Now that sense of ownership has shifted. You still recognize impact. You still care about consequences. But you no longer assume responsibility for stabilizing other people's internal worlds. You can witness emotion without absorbing it. You can understand without reorganizing yourself. This creates a calm that doesn't feel distant. It feels accurate. If you've noticed interactions feeling cleaner lately, with less residue afterward, you're not imagining it. And if this perspective resonates, subscribing simply keeps this space available whenever you return. The old negotiation reflex may still test the edges from time to time. It often arrives disguised as practicality. Maybe this should be clarified. Maybe it's better to make sure they understand. Before, those thoughts carried urgency. They were tied to prevention, avoiding future discomfort by adjusting now. Now they arise and stall. Nothing mobilizes. Not because you're unsure, but because the system no longer believes internal adjustment is required to stay safe. You can let complexity exist without pre-solving it. You can allow differences without managing outcomes. This is where the shift becomes embodied. The body no longer leans forward to explain. Breathing stays even. Muscles remain relaxed. Misalignment no longer registers as a threat. And because the body doesn't mobilize, the mind doesn't follow. The timeline stabilizes itself without effort. What ultimately confirms this shift is how ordinary it feels. There is no declaration, no sense of having arrived somewhere new. Life continues, but without internal bargaining. Your timeline no longer waits for permission to settle. It does not stay open for revision while other realities are accounted for. Experience completes itself as it unfolds. Time feels different now. Moments finish cleanly. The past isn't revisited to adjust meaning. The future isn't tasked with repairing the present. You live from a reference point that no longer bends itself around external narratives. Other people's reality can exist fully without being negotiated internally. Yours can exist fully without needing validation. Nothing needs to be concluded here. Nothing needs to be applied. The shift is already functioning. Your timeline stopped negotiating because it no longer needed to.